Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. So, you want a rabbit? We're told that there are no rabbits left in the hat at the Fed. No rabbits left. There are no policy bullets left. There are no arrows left in the quiver. There are no tools left in the toolbox. I got all of that. It's a bill. It would be nice if we could get a bill. $1 trillion as an initial tranche, a first installment, issued by the Federal Reserve, 0% credit, 50-year maturity. Nothing for the bankers. No financial services, no credit cards, no zombie banks, no hedge fund hyenas, no speculators, none of that. Only tangible physical production, leading edge infrastructure, public works. Rebuild the American passenger, freight, and commuter rail systems. Transcontinental maglev, East Coast maglev, West Coast maglev, Chicago, Minneapolis to Chicago to New Orleans maglev, and a Gulf Coast and across the Pacific, across the Southwest, another maglev. Rebuild the entire interstate highway system. Rebuild 103 nuclear reactors at the level of fourth-generation pebble-bed high-temperature reactors with every conceivable safety device. You can't go on with 40-year-old reactors built before the bad days of Jimmy Carter. You got to rebuild all the water systems, the entire canal system, coastal waterways, and all the rest of it. Got to be rebuilt. Rebuild the United States. It's a deficit of 10 to 15 trillion minimally. So start with $1 trillion, make that into a revolving credit fund, and then add another trillion and another trillion. On the one hand, until you get the infrastructure rebuilt to the standards of the 21st century, beat out the Chinese, leave the Chinese in the dust, leave everybody in the dust. Go with the American system of political economy. Let the world imitate that. It'll be beneficial to everybody. It will indeed transform the entire political situation in many, many countries. So this is all immediately clear. Obama is supposedly, while cavorting with the rich parasites up there on the Martha's Vineyard, he is supposedly going to come up with his program. His program is going to be free trade deals. Oh, my God, the giant sucking sound is going to come from Obama. Patent reform, this reminds me of Bush in 1992. Everybody knew there was a decline going on in 1992, and Bush waited a month or two to bring out his program, and it turned out to be cut the capital gains tax for rich parasites so they can speculate more. No, none of this will work. Now, the problem, of course, people will say is, yeah, that sounds great. We could have a rediscount guarantee from the Federal Reserve that state bonds and Port Authority of New York bonds would be immediately bought by the Fed, either directly or through local banks. Most of the zombie banks will have to be shut down, right? The ones that we've been mentioning, right? The big ones, J.P. Morgan, Citibank, Bank of America. These are insolvent institutions, right? If you take away too big to fail, then they fail. And that's maybe what Warren Buffett is banking on, that it's too big to fail so he can make money. But that's not getting a recovery. These zombie banks cannot finance a recovery because they are black holes. Any credit you put into the zombie banks is absorbed by the intrinsic bankruptcy of that 1.5 quadrillion of kited, cancerous, bankrupt derivatives that are there. So the rediscount guarantee. The fascist governor of New Jersey, Chris Christie, the Garden State's answer to Hermann Goering, says no, he won't build the tunnel under the Hudson River. We've got the Tappan Zee Bridge that has to be rebuilt. We've got similar things all over the place. We've got the Texas T-bone that has to be built. We've got the entire Pacific coastline from Vancouver all the way to Tijuana and beyond, and so forth. Take a look at my 5-point program at the top of the website, which is the basis of all my other activity. But now, what if you can't get through to the Congress, right? You've obviously got this group of fanatical Republicans. How could we go around this? Is there a way? Yeah, there is. Let's look back. Franklin D. Roosevelt. In the history of the Federal Reserve, there are basically 3 phases. The first is the Federal Reserve runs wild with the help of Wall Street from 1914 with Woodrow Wilson until 1933. So during Wilson, during Harding, during Coolidge, and during Hoover, the Federal Reserve runs wild. And they create, with their hot money policies, they create the bubble which becomes the crash of 1929. In 1933, however, Franklin D. Roosevelt, determined to use the immense, awesome powers, intrinsic powers of the presidency, says to the Federal Reserve, look, in effect, I could wipe you out. I could send a bill to Capitol Hill at the height of the crisis, and they'll pass it no matter what it is. I could remove you from power. This is what he should have done, actually. It was, on the whole, a mistake not to do this. If he had done it, we wouldn't be in the fix that we are now. We needed the Federal Reserve nationalized, and that would mean under normal circumstances, the House and the Senate pass the bill, the president signs it, it says the size of the money supply, the interest rates, what are the approved categories of lending, and all the other details. It's not left to a secret committee of unelected, unaccountable bankers meeting in oak-paneled boardrooms. But he didn't do it. So now we are where we are. But now the example of Roosevelt shows how, under the current circumstance, we could use the non-nationalized, essentially private character of the Fed as their biggest vulnerability. And here's what I mean. How did it work under Roosevelt? He decided that he wouldn't proceed to the formal nationalization or abolition, or I think nationalization of the Federal Reserve. So he would keep it in existence, but he would simply use his inherent political power to dictate the policy of the Fed. And here's the form it took. Roosevelt would pick up the phone. He would call the Federal Reserve, and he would say, we have a treasury auction coming up this week, and you people are going to buy our bonds at 1.2%. Those are 30-year bonds. You're going to buy the entire issue. I want the bid to cover to be at least 4. You will make those bids, and on and on. So, in effect, he's dictating policy. Mariner S. Eccles was happy to follow orders because he knew that if he said no, then Roosevelt would say, well, now you leave me no choice. We're going to wipe you out. We're going to make you back into the Bureau of the Treasury that you should have been. And again, I would have advocated, if I could go back and tell Roosevelt something, probably the biggest mistake was nationalize the Fed in 1933. When that Emergency Banking Act went through, it was represented by a newspaper on a desk in the House and Senate floors, where they voted for it sight unseen. They brought a pig in a poke. There could have been anything in there. You could have wiped out the Federal Reserve System and nationalized it as a Bureau of the Treasury. But that was not done. So here's now the possibility. Suppose you had a real president. You got to get Obama out one way or another. You've got to get somebody else in. Any normal hack politician, and maybe even Biden, under certain circumstances could be directed, more or less under duress, to do what I'm saying. The president calls Bernanke and says, I have declared a state of economic emergency. I'm invoking the Defense Production Act, the Trading with the Enemy Act, and the entire armory of related of information. And I am now going to have a press conference here in 5 minutes where I am going to announce that you, the Federal Reserve, have agreed to issue a first tranche of $1 trillion of 0% 50-year federal credit, which will flow exclusively into public works infrastructure and contracts in the area of tangible physical production, manufacturing, commodity production associated with these. That no money will go to financial services, no money speculation, no money for drug money laundering, or the other things that Wall Street does. Thank you, Bernanke, for your cooperation. I knew you would understand me. And Bernanke maybe would be choking with apoplexy or quaking in his boots. The powers of the presidency are immense. And he says, Bernanke, I have here the 3rd Infantry Division with some tanks, and if you find that you have problems with this policy, I'm going to have to put a cordon around your offices, and then I'm probably going to have to send in some marshals and have you taken away. I think Bernanke would get the message. This is the kind of stuff that we need. This is what Roosevelt or Kennedy would have done in this kind of an emergency. Back in a minute.